The debate over the transgender bathroom rights, it just moved from North Carolina to a national debate. Now, the Obama administration today sending a letter to public schools directing them to allow transgender students access to restroom facilities matching their gender identity. But critics, they're fighting back, calling it blackmail. From Fannin County, Georgia,
I will stay at home every day and homeschool.
To Fort Worth, Texas. Democracy. Anger and frustration as parents pack school district meetings over whether transgender students should be allowed to use public school bathrooms and locker rooms of the gender that they identify with.
Transgender students are our neighbors, and they are all of our children.
And for the students themselves, they say the bullying has become outrageous.
I was beaten up.
I started skipping school because I didn't feel safe in school.
Now, the Obama administration says, at the request of school districts, it is issuing what it is calling a letter of guidance, detailing how schools can ensure transgender students' legal civil rights, suggesting schools provide, quote, access to an alternative restroom, adding curtains could easily be put up in locker rooms.
It's not an enforcement action. It does not add a requirement to the applicable law.
But critics see it as an ultimatum that if they don't comply, federal school dollars may be withheld.
We will not yield to blackmail from the President of the United States.
Earlier this week, the federal government and North Carolina sued each other over that state's transgender public bathroom law. Now, it appears Texas is ready to join the fight.
I am working with the governor of North Carolina, and we are going to fight back.
Give an idea of the national public pulse here. 57% of Americans say they oppose the North Carolina transgender bathroom law, which forces transgender people to use the bathrooms of their birth gender, not the gender that they identify with. And 3/4 of Americans say they support laws guaranteeing equal protection for transgender people in jobs, housing, and public accommodations. You know, earlier today we were talking about this, Dom, Andrew, and I, and listen, I think there's patent politics going on. You saw the lieutenant governor in Texas, and you saw the governor. They're using this for political stick to say no one's going to force us. You know, we're going to fight this tooth and nail, like the transgender army's coming over the hill. And you know, I think people can see it for what it is. But, and I'll put it out there, in the end, I think the president was right. But it's a little different from a bathroom to a locker room in that if a person is not fully transitioned to their new gender or the gender that they believe they've always been but weren't anatomically born, it's going to cause, forget about a high school locker room, even in a locker room at a gym or a club, it's going to cause more than uncomfortableness. It's going to cause awkwardness going on. So I understand some of the reservations about this. But for me, what breaks the tie is, you listen to those kids. No kid does this on a lark. No kid does this not knowing that they're going to be ridiculed, ostracized, or even worse. Family's going to maybe not deal with them. Friends won't speak to them. They'll be beaten up, you know, whatever it is. For them to go through this, I think takes a tremendous amount of guts. And if it causes some uncomfortableness for some folks, to me, that's the folks' problem. I know this sounds PC and stuff, but I feel this way. Well, where do you come down on where the line starts and stops?
It's not about PC. I agree with the perspective that you just articulated. I have had the honor to know some young people that are transgender, and this is really, really difficult. They are really, really discriminated against. People look at them, some people, like freaks of nature, and it's not right. As the man said in the piece that you did, these are our children. We may not understand it, but what is the big deal? These governors are nonsense, second-rate politicians posturing. What is the big deal? If you identify with using the woman's room, they're separate stalls for the most part anyway. Once you get in the bathroom, What is the big deal?
Well, I'll do it, Andrew. The canard would be, I think, but still the argument would be, well, what prevents some guy from just deciding now to walk into a women's locker room and saying, I'm in the process of being transgender? Now, do I think that's really what's going to happen in large numbers? But if they put that out, how do you say you're completely wrong?
That's actually a difficult question to answer because, as you mentioned, during the early stages of transition, you will wind up with people who don't look like they match the gender they identify with. And so, there's not that long of a thread to go from, a guy just putting on a wig so he can mess around in the girls' room to somebody who's beginning their transition. I don't know how you draw that line, but I agree with both of you that it's something that needs to be done. There's one other aspect to the harassment that you talked about transgender people face. They're getting killed in large numbers. There was just somebody sentenced, I think, to 12 years in prison. I believe the woman's name was Evelyn Nettles. She was stopped by a group of guys walking on the street. They realized as they were harassing her that she was transgender, and so they thought, well, what does that say about me? And they killed her. So it's sometimes you need a dramatic change to sort of start the process, and in this case, I think the good outweighs the potential awkwardness, and I think that's really all we're talking about. Is
and is the president really forcing the states to do this, as they say, under like the end of the line?
Well, he's saying if you don't do it, we're going to withdraw federal aid. So that's a big hammer. And I think part of this is, part of the reaction is, the logistics of it might, there might be some objections based on that. But I think that there is an autocratic nature of some of this stuff that's going on. This is really part of the culture war. It really is, and I think there is some objections that people have. Just don't like to be told, and if you don't do it, I'm going to punish you.
But didn't we learn something, Phil? I'm not saying it's the same thing, but when same-sex marriage came out, we heard a lot of people who opposed it, governments trying to superimpose their thoughts. I mean, the idea of gays in the military. That debate lasted less than 12 hours.
Right.
All of a sudden, they instituted this, and then never mind.
I agree with that, and I would just say that I was going to add that a lot of these things are happening so fast that I think there's going to be an ironing out of this kind of these kinds of objections. I think over time. I think it's frankly, I think in the public schools, I think most kids are probably okay with this. You might have a bigger issue in the outside world, the public restroom world, and all of the things that may be kind of connected to that. But I think, generally speaking, the kids themselves are not uncomfortable with this kind of policy, despite the fact that some of these other kids are being picked on.
Okay, when we come back, we'll get back closer to home. And in New York, you saw this yesterday. Dominic was there in person. Dean Skelos getting 5 years in the slammer. This just a week after Shelley Silver got a dozen. So what will this mean for Albany going forward? And should Governor Cuomo be nervous here the next time Preet Bharara calls?